So I'm going to go through my coding of this next part. So the problem I've got now is I've got a color picker and now I want an icon picker. So I've got my bindings. So here are my options for drop downs. All drop downs have a set of options. I've not configured anything for that yet. And a current index. So all drop downs have the idea of a item that's selected, and I've called that the current item index. So I've got this bound type, so this allows me to say that I've got a control and the bound component name is not set yet, and the bound property name is likely to be something like current index. So here we've got the bound control to be the current item index. Oops, sorry, it's upside down. The bound control is drop down color. The component name is drop down color drop down. The property name is selected index. So here, let's see if I can swap these around to be consistent. Oh, I can't. I thought you could. Oh well. So the component name is difficult because this drop down currently is just a standard drop down and doesn't know about binding. So that means I'm going to have to come in here and look at how this works. So this is used as a component name called color dropdown. Now color dropdown is an extended control. So I come down to UI, color dropdown. So color dropdown is an extension of dropdown. So does that mean to do an icon dropdown, I need to create another extension called icon dropdown? I don't really want to have to do that. So to avoid that, I need some way of making color dropdown a little bit more generic. So what's common and what isn't common with color dropdown? So let's have a quick look down here. So clear options. Okay, we set a listener for on value changed because it's important for binding that we use property changed. So okay, that doesn't sound too bad. Selected index, well, okay, that's fine. But here's a problem. So our selected color is using a very specific option down item. So it would appear that selected index is different or could possibly be a problem to make that more generic. Property raised, that's nice and generic. Create lists, an index, that's generic. Okay, so here is another non-generic bit, and it's create item. And we are already overriding this. So I'm just thinking in my head whether an extension would be good or whether we can go slightly off piece, make some kind of action or delegate or some sort of contractual thing that means I don't have to keep extending this control. Or could it be if I made selected index virtual? Now that's an idea. So if I made selected index virtual, I could just keep extending these controls. So do I go the reference route, the delegate route, or do I just extend it to keep on extending? Now the thing I'm trying to think of here is to reduce the amount of code that you need to read or need to write and read in order to do this extension. So let's kind of think about this for a second. If I just copied this now, let's go with these routes, paste that, and let's just rename this and call it bindable dropdown. Okay, so bindable dropdown. So we are a dropdown and we support binding by I notify property changed. So selected image. Well, we wouldn't have that. So that would be an unknown. Properly changed event would be the same. So that's the same. Now here is this bit here. So the selected image. So it's a get set. And we need to be able to raise a property change. Selected index is an int, so that's going to remain the same. So I think all we need to do would be to make this virtual. And then we don't need this bit. So all this is just doing is selecting the index. The fact that the color, previously we were setting the color, we don't need to worry about that just yet. So we create a drop-down list, that's the index. And now we do create item, which is already overridable. But if we, a bit here that's actually setting the background control. So this is the thing that's unique to the color, is grabbing hold of this control stuff. So whenever we create an item, we want to extend that. Now this is already overridable. So the only thing is we're doing this thing with the index and option data. So this is what makes this different. We're indexing over the option data. So if I was to maneuver this code around a little bit, background child index, that's to do with that. And I just say set color, something like that. Set background color. So the item's the thing we're creating in a drop down, and then the underlying option is the selected option. So this is the thing that is kind of generic, because with the icon we want to be able to take an item that we're just about to add to the drop down, and we want to use the underlying option data. So it would appear that this is the thing, we don't want it static. If we made this virtual, and then why is that gone wrong? Cannot be private. Oh yeah, okay, protected. But obviously it's not going to be a background color, so it needs to be something slightly more vague in its naming. So set item with set item to option data. Set item with option data. Okay. So in theory, we just need to take this out. And then we have a generic control. So if I was to just indeed do that. So we've got a bindable drop down. And get rid of that comment. We've virtualized that, so when the value is set, we can do something. So what I've done is I've taken the color drop down and copied it and created a new file called Sprite. So what we've got now is we have a way of having a control, in this case a sprite control, that just deals with a selection changing and new data coming in. And with our color one, we set the background, but with our sprite one, we want to do something different. And we're not going to have color option data either this time. We're going to have sprite information. So, okay. So we call this one the selected sprites. We're just serializing it just so we can see it. So we've got a selected sprite. And we're going to have something called a sprite in here. And we're going to have sprite option data. Now actually I think option data contains a sprite. Option data sprite. Okay. Option data. Why isn't this working? Shouldn't need that. Options, a list of options. Sprite. This is strange. What's going on here? Oh, image. Of course, it's called image. And then the setting of the item. Well, we don't actually have to do anything. But we can get rid of the whole of this because the drop-down control actually supports it natively. So if it supports it natively, yes, I do still need this. Okay. Yeah, okay. To bindable drop down. Yeah, okay. TB drop down. Right, let's get going with this then. So the binding of our drop down icon. So previously we had a binding type control. So let's add that. Binding type control. That goes into here and then a binding. Oh, but I added it to the wrong thing. Binding. Okay, so the binding itself is the current item, so that's to itself. The property name is selected color for a color, and in this case we want the property name is going to be the selected sprite. And that comes from the view model. So that's the edit scene view model. That will have the selected sprite property. There's the selected color. Okay, so that's the item selector. The bound control for the color is the drop down. So can we do the same thing here? So the drop down icon. Yep. The component name is color drop down. So in here, the component name is, what is our component name? Still just a drop down mesh, so we need to change that out actually. So this needs to be taken out, and we need to add in our bindable drop down. And we hook the stuff back again. So the template is that. The item label is that. I think the image is that. Let me just check on something. So size has got a combo. And it's not set. Okay, so I don't actually know what that is yet. So drop down icon. I think that is going to change this. Shall see. Caption image. Yeah, not sure whether it's that one. Will need changing as well, possibly. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. So the component name then is this thing we've created, bindable dropdown. So we go to bindable dropdown, copy its name. And the property we want this time is its selected index. Okay. So that's the selected index. The options are a bit more interesting. So the options here for color, we bind to color bound options control. Which is this control here. And this is taking in the options data and creating this color options data as opposed to just a normal options data. Now, we've seen that we don't actually need this. So this bound options control here is all we actually need, because we don't need to do anything bizarre. So I'm just checking here what action data does, the default. So the default is just putting in the string. So that's not good enough. We don't want the string. We want the sprite. So it does look like I'm going to have to do something additional there. So that's not too bad. So let's copy this and somehow I can't copy, paste, name. We call this one sprite bound options control. So it's deriving from that. We want to call it sprite. The options coming in, but the option is actually real world option data. So all we need to do is just return it. So let's just check that I haven't gone mad. So when we bind to the value, which is a list, we clear the list. we're going over the options that are in this list. Now before it was a string of, it was the colours. So now it's going to be the sprites. So actually I think that data there is going to be a sprite. So what I'll do is I'll just put a breakpoint in here. Where should we put the breakpoint? Put the breakpoint in here. Because I don't think that that's true. I think that's actually going to be a sprite. So put a breakpoint in here. And then we can add the binding. And the drop down control is that one. And then we have to add a binding. So back to here, add a binding. And the property name is going to be, so it was user available colors. So I think it's just sprites. Sprites. We only want one-way binding. Yeah. Okay. Let's see how we get on with that. We need to run this. Okay, nothing happened. The reason nothing happened is I've not bound it. So to the bindings, we need to add bindings. Options, index. Okay, so here's the option. So it's a sprite. So this is going to go bang. For some reason, it survived it. Invalid cast. So we can now just do new options data. Sprite. So it hasn't blown up, but it's not showing us the sprites. So what have we got in here? Drop down icon. Where's our list? Drop down list. Okay, image. has the right image in here. It's just not displaying it. So is it because it's white on white? I bet it is. There's something in there. There is something in there. Yeah, look. So it appears that if you change the height to match the content to match the height of the item, that seems to do the trick. So if you run this, we've now got a much nicer scroll bar. Fits the bottom and the top incompletely. Okay. So now we've just got the problem with the selected index not initializing. So let's pick the game one. You can see the game one hasn't been selected. So if we look at the edit model, put our debug on, and as a scene view model, the selected sprite is the second sprite. 0, 1, 2 game. So the view model is correct, but the bound model hasn't been updated. So if we look at that, that is going to be the binding from edit scene view model. So when the sprite changes, it should come in here, set the value. So we're running, cancel that out, pick the one little person. So the value is 3, so that's probably right. Erase property change. So that invokes the property change, which is not going anywhere. So there's nothing listening. Okay, so the binding issue is quite interesting. So what was happening was the binding framework itself has an on enable, on disable, and when the view is being moved out back to the main view, the binding manager has been disabled, which is fine. But when it was re-enabled, it wasn't re-establishing the current binding settings. So consequently, I've had to add this refresh binding data, which was already there. We do that quite a bit, but whenever the controls that are bound are brought back into the hierarchy, re-enabled, then you have to refresh their binding. And that seems to have resolved that issue. So now if we go to edit and we pick the game one, so it's game in a kind of blue color, you get the blue color and we get, whoops, we get the game icon shown, and we come out of this and we'll pick the yellow yellow dev presentation thing. So we'll click that, so we get the kind of yellowy color and we get the dev thing. Let's just see if there's anything else in there. Do the web one. So there's a color and web is selected. So it seems like the binding is working now and the title's working, because I noticed the title wasn't working either. That didn't work, Space Shooter. scene. It's still saying game only. So there's still a problem with the binding on the text. The color, that didn't have the right icon either. It's still stuck on the wrong icon. Something curious going on there. But the title's not changing, that's certainly true. So Visual Studio is still saying game only. So still something afoot. So the text isn't binding correctly, and again, it's another enable disable problem. So in the binding itself, it also has on enable disable, and I didn't have this undated changed. So what was happening was it was coming in here and it was rebinding correctly the title text, but it wasn't then updating. So basically, when the title was called game and it was disabled, it would go away. It would come back when it was called Space Shooter. It'd come back in here and it would ready itself for when the title next changed, but it had already changed from game to Space Shooter. So you just have to put in an extra on data change in order to force it to reevaluate what the data is. And when you do that, it means that we can go from game only, and we can change to main monitor. So all the binding seems to now work correctly. He says that doesn't look right. Main monitor. Main monitor looks like a monitor. So that sprite hasn't updated. That seems to have broken again. So the color seems to be changing, but the sprite is no longer changing. It looks like I've managed to break that. Oh dear. This is why I need a testing framework. So the problem with binding seems to be an issue around setting a value in here. So what I was seeing happening was the index was being set to the value, and the underlying value property was being set. That was correct. But then immediately afterwards, this value wasn't the same, which seems to be impossible. But I believe what's happening is it's something to do with the fact that I am using this drop-down control, and I think there's an event in here that's slightly out of sync. So in order to mitigate that problem, what I've also done is a little bit of a hack. In fact, I'm going to call it a hack. And what happens is, as soon as that value is set, we call this set index, and all this does is it waits for a fixed update and then sets the value again. So the idea is you couldn't do that quickly enough to upset this, but any programmatic code that's based on the frame rate or based on the current life cycle, the player loop, this should mitigate that as a problem. So when we run now, I'm hoping that this will resolve this issue. Because we go into edit mode, so we've got a scene here and it's sort of purple and a monitor. So the purple comes out and purple is set. Oops, purple is set, and the monitor is the correct icon. So So we could do Firefox here, select that. So we've got our color. Is it the right color selected in here? Yes. Is it a web icon? Yes. So it appears that finally got through a few of those bugs. So the next problem is how to set this main icon. So we'll take a look at that. So this is the bindable control we're using, and on the color drop down, what it does is it sets the current image based on when a selection changes. So I guess we could do a similar thing here. So on the bindable control, again, this is the generic one, but what I could do is say, although we're setting the value, we could say we could look at the contents of the object, the selectable index. I'll show you what I mean by that. So, okay, we do all of this business here, and then we can say set current image So we have our options, and we know what our selected index is. So this is the selected option. And if selected option dot image doesn't equal null, then we can say this dot image equals selected image. Image is an image, selected image is a sprite. That's fun. Setting an image dot sprite. Okay, let's see what that does. Okay, well, yeah, ugly, but yeah. Yep, seems to work. So it's just a case now of making that look nicer. So we have an icon. Icon has a label. We don't want the label. Get rid of that. The image, I assume, is this thing. Is it? Where is it getting that image from? Let's have a look. So there's panel icon, drop down, arrow. So where source images game, okay, so it is that. So that's going to be tricky. So if I just create a new image in here and go to the drop down, I think on our settings, bindable drop down, this is caption image. So if I set that, is that going to make any difference? Okay, we've got two things going on there. So actually, it looks like, if I comment this out, yeah, that kind of looks good. So let's try that. Yeah. Bit big. So maybe 90 on that. Let's see how we get on. Maybe shorten it a bit, but basically it works. Yeah, it's quite good. Quite like that. So yeah, hopefully another binding set, and this time we've used a more generic component. I'll get rid of this set image now. Don't need it. Just double check I haven't broken it. Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, I hope you found that interesting watching me struggle. Okay, thanks. Bye.